My name is Samantha Reed. I'm 33 years old, and by the time I reached the front table at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner, I had already lived enough for two people and buried enough of myself to build someone else's future. I didn't enter that cafe as a guest drifting into a celebration. I walked in as the woman who had packed school lunches before sunrise, learned how to stretch groceries across impossible weeks, worked double shifts until my hands shook, skipped college so someone else could go, and taught herself how to look calm even when panic sat in her chest like a stone. I was the sister who signed school forms, chased overdue bills, lied about being tired, and stood in for stability when life gave us none. That was the history in my bones when I saw the place card waiting for me between polished silverware and folded linen. Uneducated freeloader, sister. For one long second, my brain rejected it. I genuinely thought I had reached the wrong table. Then I heard the laughter. Not loud at first, just a few clipped little giggles from the bride's side, the kind of laughter wealthy people use when they want cruelty to sound clever instead of cruel. I looked up and caught the bride's cousin watching me with a smug, expectant smile, like she had been waiting all evening to see whether I would blush, beg, or break. Then she lifted her glass and said, "So this is the embarrassing relative we heard about." A few heads turned faster. A few people looked down too late, pretending they had not heard it. Someone near the centerpiece actually smiled. I felt heat move across my face, but I refused to cry. I had survived too much to fall apart in a room full of strangers wearing expensive perfume, polished manners, and borrowed decency. I was ready to set the card down, turn around, and disappear without giving them the satisfaction of a scene. That is what I had done most of my life. Leave quietly, endure privately, keep the peace at my own expense. But before I could take more than half a step away, a hand gripped mine so tightly it stopped me cold. My brother rose from his chair, looked past me, and fixed his eyes on the bride's father with a stare I had never seen before. It was not embarrassment. It was not confusion. It was fury, sharpened by love. When he spoke, the entire room went still. Before I tell you exactly what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like there? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. "What you did to my sister tonight," he said, each word clear and hard enough to slice through the room, "will be the most expensive insult of your life." Silence dropped over the cafe so suddenly it felt unnatural, as if even the music had sensed shame and backed away from it. My brother had always been careful in public. He was the kind of man who lowered his voice instead of raising it, who found compromise before conflict, who knew how to smooth sharp moments before they turned into damage. But the man standing beside me that night was done smoothing anything. He was not there to save the mood. He was there to stop them from stripping me for sport. He reached down, picked up the place card, held it high enough for the whole room to see, then tore it clean in half. The sound was small, but in that silence, it hit like a crack across glass. Across the room, the bride's father leaned back in his chair, one arm draped with practiced ease, as if public humiliation became elegant once served in a room with candles and imported wine. "You should calm down," he said smoothly. "No one forced your sister to become what she is." The insult was quieter than the card, but sharper. I felt the old instinct move through me, the reflex to step in, soften this, protect my brother from making a public mistake because of me. I had spent so many years taking blows in silence that my first response to disrespect was still management, not resistance. But before I could speak, he moved half a step in front of me. It was subtle, protective, final. "You don't get to define her," he said. "You don't get to laugh at the woman who kept me fed when our refrigerator was nearly empty. You don't get to mock the person who stood outside my school office pretending everything was fine when she had just worked 16 hours and had not slept. You don't get to invite her here just to turn her into entertainment for your family. His voice was not dramatic. That was what made it devastating. He was not defending me out of guilt or theatrics. He was telling the truth in a room where truth had become the most offensive thing anyone could offer. I stared at him, and for a second the insult itself almost disappeared under the force of what he was doing. Then the bride's cousin rolled her eyes and let out a thin little laugh, but it landed weakly now. The room had changed. The balance had shifted. The joke had stopped being funny the second someone named it as cruelty. Then my brother said something else, quieter, but it cut deeper than anger. "You thought she would swallow this," he said, looking at the bride's father. "You counted on her being too dignified to humiliate you back." That hit me in a place I hadn't prepared for. Because he was right. I had spent years being the one who absorbed pain so someone else could keep moving. And standing there, in that room full of people who had mistaken restraint for inferiority, I heard the echo of my own voice from years earlier, telling a scared teenage boy, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Back then he had believed me completely. Tonight, without warning, he was returning the promise. I could feel heat climbing from my throat into my face, but beneath the embarrassment something else was settling into place. Maybe humiliation burns so hot that eventually it cools into clarity. Maybe there comes a point when being insulted publicly hurts less than realizing how many years you have wasted trying to be small enough for other people to feel comfortable. I stepped beside my brother before he could say anything more and lifted my chin, even though my hands were trembling so badly I had to lock my fingers together to hide it. "You want to know what's embarrassing?" I asked, looking directly at the table where the laughter had begun. "It's not working without a degree. It's not sacrificing comfort. It's not choosing survival over appearances. What's embarrassing is building an entire evening around humiliating someone who came here in good faith." A few guests shifted in their seats. One woman lowered her glass. A man near the back stopped pretending to scroll through his phone. The bride's cousin swirled the ice in her drink and gave me a bright, poisonous smile. "Please," she said, "you think working hard makes you a hero? Some of us make 10 times your annual income with one click. That doesn't mean we ask for applause." That line landed exactly where she wanted it to. Not because money has power over truth, but because she said it with the confidence of someone who had never once had to measure dignity against rent. It was not really about income. It was about ranking, about deciding which kind of struggle deserved respect and which kind deserved a sneer. I looked at her and, strangely, felt less afraid than before. People like her sound powerful only when the rest of us agree to be ashamed. "I didn't come here asking for applause," I said. "I came because my brother wanted me here. That should have been enough." The bride's father gave a dismissive shrug, like I was a minor inconvenience in the staging of a much grander evening. Men like him often believe there are only two categories of women worth noticing: women who entertain the room and women who obey it. I had obeyed rooms my entire life. Rooms at work, rooms with landlords, rooms with school officials, rooms where smiling politely was the price of survival. But I had not survived all that just to stand in a decorated cafe and let strangers reduce me to a printed insult. "You labeled me before I even opened my mouth," I continued. "That tells me everything I need to know. This was never about a joke. This was about making sure everyone here understood where you think people like me belong." The cousin's smile thinned, and for the first time I saw irritation crack through her confidence. My brother stood still beside me, but the anger coming off him felt almost physical, like heat from a live wire. I had spent years shielding him from instability, from humiliation, from the ugliness of adults who use power to make themselves feel taller. Now he was seeing it in full, and for once, I was not rushing to cover it up. I was letting him see exactly what I had spent years surviving in silence. "You can call me uneducated," I said, sweeping my eyes across their side of the room. "But ignorance is not measured by diplomas. Sometimes it's measured by how much money people need around them before they feel safe being cruel." That landed. I saw it in the stillness. I saw it in the bride's face, which had started to change from discomfort into something more dangerous. Recognition. If you have ever walked into a room where people had already decided who you were before you spoke, then you know the silence that comes next. It is not empty, it is loaded. It waits to see whether you will shrink, apologize, and disappear, or stand there long enough to make everyone feel what they created. The bride's father finally stood, and the movement alone shifted the room. He was tall, carefully tailored, practiced in the kind of authority that depends on never being challenged in front of an audience, and never having to explain himself to people he considered beneath him. "You're making a spectacle out of nothing," he said. "You should be grateful you were invited at all." That sentence did what the card itself had not. It stripped off the last layer of pretense. This was not a poorly judged joke, not an unfortunate lapse in taste. This was deliberate. An invitation extended downward, then weaponized upward. A reminder of social place disguised as hospitality. A test of how much disrespect someone like me would swallow to remain in a room built by people like him and financed by appearances. "Grateful?" I repeated. "For what? For being mocked at my brother's wedding dinner? For being seated like a prop so your family could enjoy the reaction?" His jaw tightened, but I kept going because once truth starts moving, stopping it feels more dishonest than speaking it. "Do you know where I was the night before my brother took his college entrance exam? I was sitting in a plastic chair outside an emergency room because I had pushed myself past exhaustion on a warehouse shift. I texted him good luck from that hallway and told him not to worry about me. Not because I'm a martyr. Not because I needed applause. Because that is what family does when love is real. We carry each other when no one else will, and we do it without humiliating the person who carried the weight." The room changed again after that. No one laughed. Even the bride looked shaken now, as if she had suddenly realized the story about me she had been handed was not just incomplete, but intentionally poisoned. The cousin dropped her eyes. The bride's father, however, did what men like him often do when morality fails them. He reached for force. He gave a short gesture toward one of the venue staff near the entrance. "Remove her," he said. Not loudly, but clearly. The staff member froze in place, caught between paycheck and conscience. I could see it all over his face. My brother stepped forward instantly. "Touch my sister and this dinner is over." Every head snapped toward him. The bride rose so abruptly that her chair scraped hard against the floor. "Dad," she said, voice shaking. "Stop." But he was beyond stopping. Public control was slipping, and that made him reckless. "This woman has disrupted enough," he snapped. "If she cannot behave with dignity, she can leave." I laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because sometimes hypocrisy grows so obvious it stops sounding threatening and starts sounding pathetic. "Dignity?" I asked. "You printed my humiliation on cardstock and set it at the table. Do not say that word tonight unless you are willing to define it honestly." The guests were no longer passive observers. I could see discomfort spreading through them like a stain. People who had smiled politely a few minutes earlier now looked from him to me with tight expressions, suddenly aware that silence has a cost when cruelty is this visible. My brother turned toward the bride's family table, his voice lower now, steadier, almost more frightening because of how controlled it was. "Anyone here still thinks this is harmless can say it out loud right now." No one did. That silence was louder than any defense they could have attempted. It was the silence of people realizing they had mistaken wealth for moral authority and had just watched that illusion crack in public, right in the middle of a celebration that was supposed to prove how refined this family was. The bride looked like someone waking up inside the wrong life. Until then, she had existed in that convenient space some people learn to occupy, close enough to cruelty to benefit from it, far enough to pretend they did not authorize it, and sheltered enough to call that distance innocence. But the room was watching now, and neutrality had become impossible. The laughter had died, the music no longer mattered, and every guest seemed to understand that whatever happened next would define more than a rehearsal dinner. "This is not how tonight was supposed to be," she said, and there were tears in her eyes, though I could not tell whether they came from humiliation, guilt, fear, or the shock of seeing her family's ugliness exposed under full light. "Then maybe it should not have been built on this kind of family," my brother replied. His voice was no longer sharp, it was calm, and that calm was devastating. Anger can be dismissed as emotion. Calm truth is much harder to escape, especially when it comes from someone who has finally stopped protecting your comfort. The bride's cousin, still trying to recover control of the atmosphere, gave a little laugh and said, "Oh, come on. Everyone is acting like she was publicly executed. It was a joke. A tacky joke, maybe, but still a joke." My brother turned so quickly toward her that she actually leaned back in her chair. "Say that again," he said. "Say it while looking at the woman who paid my rent when I was 19 and had holes in her shoes. Say it while looking at the person you called a freeloader. Say it while standing behind your own money instead of your uncle's." That last line landed harder than she expected. Her face tightened, and for the first time the room saw her not as a confident socialite, but as what she really was in that moment. A coward hiding inside group cruelty, bold only when cruelty had witnesses and backup. Then the bride did something that shifted the entire night onto a new axis. She turned to her father, not to us, and asked the question she should have asked before anything began. "Did you approve that card?" He did not answer right away, which was answer enough. The silence stretched so long I could hear the faint clink of glass being set down somewhere behind me. Then he said, "I approved honesty." Her face changed. Not theatrically, not in a way meant for sympathy, just enough for everyone to see that something central inside her had cracked. "If this is honesty to you," she said, "then I don't know what I'm marrying into anymore." That struck the room harder than any shouting had. Her father stepped toward her with the impatience of a man who believed explanation itself was beneath him. "Do not be ridiculous. This is one woman causing a scene." "No," she said, stronger now. "This is my family humiliating the person my fiancé loves most in the world." I watched my brother's expression shift. Not relief, not forgiveness, just recognition that she had finally chosen a side. But late choices still leave damage, and everyone in that room could feel how late this one was. The cousin tried one more time to sneer her way out of accountability. "You're seriously going to derail your wedding over this?" The bride turned on her so sharply that even I felt the force of it. "Over this? You mean over publicly degrading someone who came here to support me? Over treating decency like a weakness and cruelty like a family joke? Yes. If this family thinks that is acceptable, then yes." Murmurs spread around the room. A woman near the center table whispered something to her husband. Someone else quietly set down a fork they had been holding this entire time. The bride wiped her cheek and looked at my brother fully. "If you want to leave," she said, "I understand." Then she turned back to her father. "And if this doesn't stop right now, there won't be a wedding tomorrow." That was the first undeniable consequence of the night, and everyone felt it. The air changed. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was a fracture line running through the middle of two families, one built on appearances and one built on sacrifice. Her father stared at her as if she had betrayed him, but what had really betrayed him was the truth, spoken out loud in a room he thought he controlled. The bride's mother opened her mouth as if to calm things down, then stopped. Even she seemed to understand that there are moments when smoothing the surface only buries rot deeper. If the day meant to celebrate, family could be threatened so completely by one public truth, then maybe truth was never the danger. Exposure was. And standing there, watching the bride choose between the comfort she came from and the decency she had ignored, I realized something painful. People do not become good because they are near goodness. At some point, they have to choose it. If your loved one's wedding became the stage where you were humiliated by their future in-laws, would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you let the whole room choke on what they created? The bride's father looked around the room and realized too late that his authority had always depended on privacy, on implication, on people being too intimidated, too polite, or too invested to challenge him in the open. That was over now. The guests were not smiling. The staff were not moving. Even the bride's mother had gone pale in a way that suggested this was not the first time he had mistaken power for immunity and image for character. He straightened his jacket as though expensive fabric could restore control and said, "You're all being emotional. This family has invested too much into this wedding to let one bitter woman destroy it." That was when my brother pulled his phone from his pocket. He did not slam it onto the table or raise it like a weapon. He simply held it in his palm and looked at the man across from him with a steadiness that made the entire room lean in. "Then let's talk about investment," he said. A hush moved over the cafe again, deeper than before, the kind of silence that comes when people know they are about to hear something they cannot unhear. "You told everyone this wedding was a gift from your side," he continued. "That your family was covering the venue, the dinner, the upgraded floral package, the musicians, the honeymoon suite. You seem to enjoy repeating that. You made sure everyone heard it more than once." The bride's father's expression hardened instantly. "Watch yourself." But my brother kept going. "You forgot one thing. Most of the final payments cleared through my account this week." The room reacted like something physical had broken open. I heard an actual gasp from somewhere near the back. The bride's mother turned so sharply toward her husband that her chair legs scraped across the floor. "What is he talking about?" she asked, voice thin with disbelief. My brother unlocked his phone, tapped twice, and angled the screen toward the nearest cluster of people. "When your future father-in-law came to me 2 months ago saying there were temporary liquidity issues, I covered the vendor shortfalls because I didn't want my fiancé embarrassed. I said nothing because I thought I was helping build a family. Instead, your family turned my sister into entertainment." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Not loud, not chaotic, but stunned and immediate, like everyone was recalculating the entire evening at once. The bride closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them, she looked years older. The humiliation of the night had shifted direction completely. The man who had mocked me as a burden had quietly relied on the generosity of the brother I had raised. The same family that printed Freeloader on my place card had been leaning on my brother's money while performing status for a room full of guests. Her father stepped forward, furious now, not because injustice had been done, but because the lie under his image had been exposed. "That was a private arrangement," he snapped. "No," my brother replied. "It was a generous arrangement, and it ends tonight." He looked toward the venue coordinator who had been standing frozen near a pillar. "Any outstanding balances from my side are canceled. Any unpaid vendors after midnight can send invoices directly to him." He pointed at the bride's father. I watched the color drain from that man's face so fast it was almost surreal. Suddenly the tailored suit, the watch, the polished speech patterns, the carefully cultivated superiority, none of it looked solid anymore, just expensive packaging around panic. The cousin tried to say something, but my brother cut her off with one sharp glance. And before you open your mouth again, let's finish this honestly. You arranged the place card, didn't you? Her silence answered before her expression did. The bride turned toward her in disbelief. You did what? The cousin started stammering, first that it was supposed to be funny, then that everyone was overreacting, then that she never thought it would become this dramatic. The bride's father barked at her to be quiet, but it was too late. The room had found not only a culprit, but a pattern. This was not one rude joke. It was a whole family system that protected cruelty as long as it entertained the right people and inconvenienced the wrong one. I stepped forward then, and unlike earlier, I did not need a long speech. Today I didn't lose anything, I said, looking directly at the bride's father. But you just lost control of this room, the respect you perform so carefully, and maybe your daughter's trust. That is a much more expensive insult than the one you printed for me. The words settled over the room like a verdict. No one laughed. No one interrupted. Even the cousin's tears, when they came, looked useless. The bride's mother sat down as if her legs had given out. Somewhere to my right, a guest muttered, "My God," under his breath. It was the sound people make when they realize they have spent an hour watching a social hierarchy collapse from the inside. And still, the bride's father tried to recover. "You think this embarrasses me?" he said, though his voice had lost its certainty. "Money can be fixed." I looked at him and understood something then. He still believed this was about finances, invoices, optics, recoverable damage. He still did not understand that the thing breaking apart in front of him was not the wedding budget. It was the illusion that he was the biggest person in the room. "Maybe," I said quietly. "But character doesn't recover as easily once everyone sees what's underneath." The final unraveling happened faster than I expected and slower than he deserved. Once truth cracks through the surface of a room like that, it does not politely stop where the powerful ask it to. It keeps moving. It gets under tablecloths and beneath polished smiles and through every whispered excuse people once used to protect the wrong person. The bride took off her engagement ring, not with dramatic flourish, not with a speech shaped for attention, but with the exhausted precision of someone who had finally seen enough to make denial impossible. She held it in her palm for one long second, staring at it like it belonged to a version of herself she could no longer defend, then placed it on the table in front of her father instead of returning it to my brother. That mattered. She was not ending the moment because she had stopped loving the man she was supposed to marry. She was ending it because she finally understood the kind of foundation her family had laid beneath that love, and she no longer trusted herself inside it. "I can't do this tomorrow," she said. Her voice was broken, but steady enough to carry to every corner of the room. "Not with this hanging over us. Not while my family is capable of this. Not while I'm still trying to understand why I didn't stop it sooner." My brother closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment I saw the boy I had raised beneath the man he had become. The boy who still wanted to fix pain even when he did not cause it. The boy who once believed that if he just worked hard enough, loved hard enough, endured enough, people would eventually choose decency. But when he opened his eyes again, there was only clarity. "Then don't," he said. "No begging, no bargaining, no desperate attempt to save appearances. Just truth." That, more than anything, revealed how different he was from the people across the room. He was willing to lose a wedding before he lost himself. The guests began murmuring in earnest now, not the entertained little whispers from earlier, but the restless, embarrassed, reputation-conscious whispers of people realizing they had just witnessed a social collapse they would be talking about for months. One older couple from the groom's side quietly stood and slipped toward the exit first. Then two business associates of the bride's father followed, after an awkward nod to the venue manager. A few more guests rose one by one, each departure hitting him harder than shouting ever could. Powerful men can survive confrontation. What they cannot endure comfortably is abandonment by an audience that no longer finds them impressive. The bride's mother sat down hard, visibly shaken. The cousin, suddenly stripped of all sarcasm and posture, started crying openly, but no one rushed to comfort her. That, more than anything, told me how completely the room had shifted. People were no longer deciding whether the night had gone too far. They had accepted that it had, and they knew exactly who had pushed it there. My brother turned to me and asked softly, "Are you ready to go?" I looked around one last time. The flowers were still beautiful, the candles still flickered, the string lights still glowed like the evening had a future. But at the center of all of it stood a man who had spent his life confusing image with worth, now abandoned in the wreckage of the very performance he staged. He looked smaller somehow, though his body had not changed. Exposure had a way of shrinking people who built themselves out of intimidation. He called after us once, his voice rough now with desperation and anger. "You're making a mistake, both of you." I paused at the doorway and faced him. "No," I said. "The mistake was thinking kindness was weakness, that sacrifice was shameful, and that people without titles would stay quiet while you stepped on them. You did not just insult me tonight. You exposed yourself in front of everyone you wanted to impress." For the first time all evening he had no reply. No polished comeback, no command, no smug correction. Just a face full of the dawning realization that the room had stopped belonging to him. Then I walked out with my brother beside me. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time that evening I could breathe without feeling watched. We stood on the sidewalk under the dim spill of light from the cafe windows, listening to the muffled collapse of a celebration still trying to pretend it could continue. I had entered that place thinking I might have to swallow one more humiliation for the sake of peace. I left understanding something I should have learned years earlier. Peace bought with self-erasure is not peace. It is surrender. And I had surrendered enough of my life already. My brother stood beside me in silence for a moment, then looked up at the windows glowing above us. "I'm sorry," he said. It was barely above a whisper. "I should have seen sooner what kind of family I was walking into." I turned toward him and shook my head. "No, tonight you saw it. That's what matters." He let out a breath like a man setting down something heavy he had carried too long. Behind us, through the glass, I could still see movement, staff clearing tables, guests gathering coats, the bride standing apart from her parents like the invisible line between them had finally become visible. The next morning, the damage spread exactly the way arrogant people always assume it won't. 3 vendors publicly tagged the bride's father in payment disputes. One guest's post about the Freeloader card scandal spread faster than anyone in that room could contain. By noon, the wedding was officially postponed. By afternoon, people who had praised his generosity were privately asking who had really financed the event. By evening, everyone knew the same truth he had tried so hard to bury. The so-called uneducated freeloader sister had walked in alone. But the people who walked out disgraced were the ones who had everything money could buy and still could not purchase decency, loyalty, or class. And somewhere between the humiliation of that night and the fallout of the next day, something in me settled. Not because revenge healed everything. It didn't. Not because pain disappeared. It didn't. But because once, finally, the shame landed where it belonged. I was not the woman at the table with the cruel card anymore. I was the woman who walked through humiliation and left the people who caused it standing in their own ruin. So tell me this, after a night like that, who really lost everything? The sister they mocked, or the family that lost its image, its control, and its daughter's trust in a single evening? At Revenge Mangan, our team is dedicated to creating meaningful and engaging stories that leave a lasting impact on viewers. We are committed to making it clear that every story on this channel is fictional and created to share educational lessons, positive values, and useful life insights. After hearing this story, which character did you like the most and why? Also, what kind of story topic would you like Revenge Mangan to create next?